matters referred to me, which would be specific, depending on, as you see, one of them is an example, recover monies for us, perhaps prepare an agreement for us. So I was not an employee of Social Security. So as I said, Social Security is a public enterprise. It's a public enterprise over which the government has supervisory authority to ensure that the public enterprises operates properly. So if the government is setting up an inquiry about a certain aspect of the dealings of the enterprise, obviously those dealings would be questionable dealings and would be inconsistent, it is assumed, would be inconsistent with the objectives or the mandate of that enterprise. And that's why they are being investigated. So if the government appoints me, who is an external counsel of Social Security and Finance Corporation, there is no conflict, because I'm going to be representing the government's interest in this matter to find out whether what happened was wrong. Just as if I am the lawyer of Social Security, or when I'm the lawyer of Social Security, I represent Social Security, not any employee. I represent Social Security and its interests. So I have the best interest, I am expected to have the best interest of Social Security at heart, as I am being required by government to actually uphold that best interest. So that's why the interest of government in protecting Social Security aligns with my interest as external counsel who acts for Social Security and is expected to, in other words, protect the interests of Social Security. And that's why I said to you, in my discussions with the Attorney General, there was no apparent conflict, meaning on the face of it, there was no conflict of interest. But it was possible that down the line, we may come across a transaction in which I may be conflicted. And in that case, we will deal with it when the matter arose. And that is why you will realize that with regard to Social Security, a second lawyer was hired, was retained, not hired, was engaged by the Attorney General to cover certain aspects of the investigation relating to Social Security because of my involvement. And that's why Mr. Bachili was engaged to cover certain aspects. So that is what was agreed. So we were very much alive. As lawyers, we are always alive to conflicts of interest, and the matter was addressed upfront between me and the Attorney General.
Okay. I would like us to look at the legal notice again. Because whilst the first paragraph, the first recital, would not give us the context as to why the commission was set up and the scope of its authority, I would like to look at the scope of the commission's authority, and you find that on the second page, under the operative part. Let's look at paragraph 2. 2.1b.
1.
Paragraph 2.1b should be on page 3, at the top of page 3. And it says to give it context, let me read the entirety of the provision. It says, 2 is the authority of the commission. 1 is the commission is authorized to. B is to inquire into and investigate the involvement of the executive arm of government under the former president in the withdrawal and application of funds or resources of public bodies, enterprises, offices, and then it goes on to C. My question is, the legal notice itself envisions. Technical, is my mic in order? Yes, the legal notice itself envisions that you will be looking into the activities of public bodies at the time the former president, during the tenure of the former president. Wouldn't you call this an apparent wouldn't this appear as an apparent conflict if you have to look into the affairs of a client that you are representing actively in court at the time?
No. It's a recital that gives you the background. That's why it's a preamble. And it gives you a background as to the setting up of the commission. And the paragraph that you have mentioned, which is the commission is authorized to A, then you refer to B, inquire into and investigate the involvement of the executive arm of government under former President Jammeh in the withdrawal and applications of funds or resources of public bodies, enterprise, and offices. So the commission was not on the activities of public enterprises. It was limited in general. It was limited to the funds, the financial dealings, if any, between the former president or his office when he was in charge and these public enterprises. So the commission of inquiry was set up to give it context, or to perhaps elaborate more on the context, was set up because the government that followed the government of the former president came to the conclusion that something had gone wrong insofar as the former president and his dealings with those the public enterprises that I mentioned is concerned. And the commission was targeted. At investigating those activities. I am external counsel. I represent Social Security I represented Social Security of those that were listed, Social Security and GAMTEL. The interest of Gambia government aligns with the interest of the public enterprises.
How so?
Because
can we zero into the interest?
Yes, the interest. Yes. Exactly.
Because I would contend with you on that.
The public enterprises were established, they're called public enterprises because they are all established by statutory authority or emanate from statutory authority, established for the public interest, to carry out a function that is public. They report to government, they are supervised by government, even if they are companies and they have shares, the shares are entirely held by government, as in the case of GAMTEL and GAMCEL. So these public enterprises, in common language, are owned by government. They are part of government. Since they are owned by government and are part of government, their interest is the interest of government. And that's why government is able to set up an inquiry over their activities. They are not private, they are public. And that's why the interests are the same. The interests of all public bodies are the same as the interests of government. They are all set up for the public interest. They are one and the same. That is why that's what I mean by alignment. Now, for in conflict of interest to arise, the interests have to be in opposition. They have to be adverse. So if I was a lawyer for any of the companies that are being investigated, I cannot, there would be conflict of interest because I couldn't be lawyer for the other side.
Let me ask a question.
Why the interests align.
Why did you recuse yourself along the line?
I did not recuse myself along the line generally. I recused myself with regard to certain specific parts of the investigation.
And Social Security was one of them?
No, I did not recuse myself generally from Social Security investigation. As regards Social Security, I recused myself from two matters. Now, Social Security owned two companies, and these companies were
Oh, by the way, your evidence is for the committee. I am just a conduit to ask questions.
That is apparent, but
so
obviously.
you could go on.
Thank you for reminding me.
Thank
you. Mr. Chairman, I did not recuse myself generally on social security matters. I recused myself on specific aspects of the social security matter. There were two of them. The first one, Social Security owns Ocean Bay and Sun Beach. When we came to investigate Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, it was realized that both hotels were leased. They were leased out to two companies. These were private companies, they were foreign companies. And before the commission had started, a year before the commission had started, Social Security had instructed us to sue those two companies to recover the hotel from them because they were not paying rent. So my office had instituted action on the instructions of Social Security through Ocean Bay. We had started action against those two companies. So I specifically wrote to the chairman of the commission to draw their attention to the fact that my office was already in a case against those two companies. And it would not be fair for us to investigate the same two companies as regards the lease they had with Ocean Bay. Because those two companies can claim that we are being biased against them. So I recused myself specifically on the investigation of the lease between Ocean Bay and Sun Beach and those companies. That is what I recused ourselves because our firm was already representing Ocean Bay and Sun Beach in a case against the two companies to evict them. And now the commission was going to investigate those leases, how those leases came about. So we recused ourselves. The second aspect on which we recused ourselves, and another lawyer, that's the same lawyer, was asked to investigate, to work with the commission to investigate, was on the acquisition or on the renovation of Ocean Bay. Social Security acquired Ocean Bay. And when Social Security acquired Ocean Bay, my firm, and this was early in the 2000s, my firm had signed I think it was, we were involved. I think we had signed the agreement. I think it was the construction or renovation agreement between Ocean Bay and I think it was Lali Diab. So because we signed, we recused ourselves. So two matters relating to Social Security, only we recused ourselves. And this was in relation to those two hotels owned by Ocean Bay Hotel. In fact, they were companies, but they are companies wholly owned by Social Security. That's Ocean Bay and Sun Beach, and also the renovation of Ocean Bay and Sun Beach. And so this is an example of specific transactions which we were involved in as lawyers for Social Security. And when we came to them, we recused ourselves. But as far as Social Security is concerned generally, there was no conflict of interest in a general manner. I hope members of the committee understand, but I can explain further.
Sure, I'm sure the members will probe on that later. However, I want to ask, at the point at which the discussions were being held for you to assume the role of lead counsel, are you telling the committee that that conflict, however slight it might have been, was not foreseen?
No. You remember? No, it wasn't. That's the question. That's the answer. And if I may explain.
Please do.
If you look at the terms of reference, there's nothing specific about it. It's an investigation.
Which terms of reference?
I'll exhibit
the commission
MOJ 2.
Okay.
MOJ 2, the Commission of Inquiry Terms of Reference. My services were being engaged to conduct a to an inquiry. Nobody knew what the inquiry would bring. We were at the beginning of the inquiry. Just like, I suppose now you are at the beginning of an inquiry. You don't know what the inquiry will bring. So that is why I raised the fact that, well, we are lawyers for Social Security, and we were lawyers we were terminated for a while, but they brought us back sometime around May. They started giving us work again. So I drew that fact to the attention of the AG, that we were lawyers for Social Security, and we were lawyers for Gamtel and Gamcel. But nevertheless, we agreed that since the interest of government aligns with the interest of this public enterprise, because whatever some harm is expected to have been done, and that is the harm the government is trying to investigate. That's what the Commission of Inquiry is about. But the details were not known at that stage. So we agreed that since there is no apparent conflict of interest, because the interests of government and the interests of PEs are the same, public enterprise are the same. However, if during the course of the investigation any matter arises in which there is a conflict of interest, then we would discuss it and the proper steps would be taken. So obviously, as at the beginning of the commission, we could not know what would come up. And therefore, your answer is no, there was no apparent conflict of interest.
Thank you. Well, I agree with you that the interest of government and its institutions would naturally be one. But that's in a general sense, of course. But looking at the specific instance we find ourselves in, and you yourself have mentioned that the government believed that there was harm, I believe that's the word you use, harm done in some of the institutions. Now this harm, if we look at it, perhaps I take you back to MOJ2, specifically back to the same clause, that is 2. Let's look at 2 sub 1 3. The Commission is authorized to identify institutions, persons, and groups of persons directly involved in payments, withdrawals, and applications of sums. And then I had read B, but let me continue reading B from where I stopped. It goes on to say enterprises, offices, or projects included but not limited to Social Security and Housing Corporation, Gambia Ports Authority goes on to list them and say, and 2, ascertain whether applicable policies and procedures were followed. That's 1. Ascertain whether the funds or resources withdrawn or applied were properly applied to budgeted or lawful purposes. Identify the institutions, persons, and groups of persons directly involved in the withdrawal and application of the said funds or resources. Right? I'll stop there and go back to Roman numeral I, which says ascertain whether applicable policies and procedures were followed. If we begin with that, having in mind that what the Commission is authorized to do has been identified by the league, discussed with you, but from your that was done. You ought to have those, like you said, in mind, that's a red flag that should have been discussed. And it's clear that you raised it. And it was looked at.
Sorry, what is the question?
My question is coming. I'm trying to give you context. To my mind, that is a red flag, Mrs. Bensouda, because while you have admitted that you didn't know where the evidence would take you at the beginning, or rather the setting up of the commission, it is apparent that you would have had to look at Social Security and other clients of yours, or other former clients, and look at their policies, procedures, ascertain whether the funds or resources were withdrawn or applied, were properly applied, or rather were applied improperly, identify institutions, persons, and groups of persons directly involved in those withdrawals and applications of funds and resources. Now, of course, it is apparent that down the line, the conflict was realized and you recused yourself. My question is, it is apparent why it was not apparent to you or the Attorney General or the Ministry of Justice that this conflict would indeed arise at some point in the tenure of the Commission.
Thank you, Council. Firstly, Mr. Chairman, there was no red flag. I was certain that I had never represented former President Jammeh in any form, and I had never represented any of his companies in any form. There would have been a red flag if I had represented any of them. So the first question to be answered, for instance, Mr. Chair, if you instruct me to take Honorable Jammeh to court, the first thing you would like to know is my relationship with Honorable Jammeh. That is simple. So if I have a relationship with Honorable Jammeh, perhaps he's my cousin, or perhaps I had worked for him before, that's a red flag. Because I cannot represent you, you cannot expect me to represent you in all good faith and honesty when I have a relationship with him. So the first question was whether there was anything preventing me from investigating the former President Yahya Jammeh or his family. That is the primary conflict. And if I had in any way represented them, then the conflict would be apparent. Even there, we would have to discuss in what way I had represented them, and that representation would prevent me from investigating him. So, as far as my representation of Social Security is concerned, in any way, there was no apparent conflict, there was no red flag. But this is a wide-ranging investigation, and I have been in practice for 40 years. Presumably, during a period of 22 years, that I have represented Social Security, there might be a transaction that we come across that I cannot investigate because I was involved in what one way or the other. So that was the discussion. So we agreed, yes, on the face of the terms of reference, issues to be investigated are wide-ranging, but all of them are about the dealing between the public enterprise and former President Jammeh or his family or his associates. At this time, we did not even know who his associates were because they had not yet been identified. They were not identified by the terms of reference. So there was no apparent conflict whatsoever. And that is why the disputed, we are professionals. The Attorney General is an experienced lawyer. I had been in practice by that time for over 30 years. The chairperson of the commission is the oldest lawyer in the profession. So the conclusion that was arrived at is, yes, there is no apparent conflict, absolutely, because my representation of parastatals is what gave me an advantage, and that is why the Attorney General thought I was probably the most appropriate person to approach, because I understood how they operated. My representation of parastatals aligns with government interest. Government interest is the same as PE interest, as considered to by my learned friend. So there's nothing in these terms of reference of the commission that raised any red flag. So, but we agreed, if in due course any transaction was being looked at, which suggests that I was involved in the transaction between the parastatal and His Excellency Yahya Jammeh, or an associate of Yahya Jammeh, then I would recuse myself. Now, it happened that in those cases that I mentioned, in the case of Ocean Bay, the foreign company that the hotel was leased to, the commission found out that these were companies working with the former President Yahya Jammeh. And so they were named close associates. And since we were already in court with them, still on behalf of Social Security, it was not fair that I then became the lawyer to investigate them, because I was already in court with them on behalf of Social Security. As regards the other aspects, it became clear that when the contractor was awarded the contract to renovate Ocean Bay, my firm prepared the document. That was around, I think, late 1990 something. So since my firm prepared it, the commission said, okay, we will retain the services of another lawyer to investigate that transaction. So that is how it was resolved. But as I said, and as I have repeated, representing public enterprise and representing government are the same. And that is why the Attorney General is able to represent any public body. Even though he's the Attorney General, the legal advisor, and lawyer for the state, he is able to step in and represent any public body. It's because the interests are the same.
Yes, I would say once more that I agree that generally the interests are the same. But in this specific instance where you're investigating public bodies, and they were investigated, Ms. Bensouda, because the commission itself reported on Social Security. Social Security was one of the bodies that were extensively investigated. You would agree with me?
Social Security and housing, none of the PEs were investigated generally. They were investigated only as to their dealings with former President Jammeh. I mean, and Social Security was no exception. Only those transactions, only those issues which involved former president were investigated. Nothing else was investigated. For all of them, only because that was the mandate of the commission. And the commission, a commission cannot go outside its mandate.